Well, hello everybody, I'm LA Little, and this is your weekly NeoTA wrap. We take a look at these markets, we do it from a neoclassical perspective each time. We ask ourselves one question: what happened last week? What does that tell us about the coming ones? Do a show every Sunday evening, broadcast at or before 10 o'clock Eastern Time, and archived on YouTube under the channel LA Little. Subscribe anytime content is pushed. You'll be notified as far as these markets and what they did. Up week last week. This is like the third week in a row that we've left long tails on the weekly charts. In other words, they try to take it down, and each time they push it right back up by the end of the week. Third week in a row, you're at the top on the S&P 500 trying to break out. Doesn't want to give it up, folks. Just keeps coming. If I look at it a little different than we typically do, and that is if we come in here, we look at it from a long-term perspective. And so I've got the monthly chart up. You know, the last time we had any serious volatility was about 2.5, 3 years ago. About 3 years ago now. And since then, it's pretty much been a straight shot to the north, right? So, I mean, if you draw this out, you know, I don't draw these trend lines, but a lot of folks like those. You know, I think the way they do it is the way they like to do it is they go take the bottom end of that. So, you know, once price breaks under where you thought it wasn't going to, then they redefine it and they make it lower. If you do it that way, and if you put those lines in, you know, you kind of have, you know, kind of a nice channel going on, right? And that says that, you know, if this price starts moving up to get to the top of that channel, you know, it's quite a ways up. I mean, this thing can get 2,200 easy, right, in terms of a breakout move, if in fact it's going to do that. But that's the question, right? Is it really going to do that? Is there anything in here that tells us that it's going to do that? Well, the monthly chart's not going to tell us that. It's simply going to tell us that the trend is strong and continues to be strong. But if we bring in the weekly chart, you know, we can get a little better sense of what's happening. And on the weekly chart, you have the breakout. Swing point high, 21.1959. We close it at 21.22. So you're closing over that, new highs. Volume over there 165, volume over here 156, a little less volume. That's why the red arrow. But here we are, folks, trying to break it higher. And if you take that and you look at it on the daily, you've also got, you know, the break of the high just about to take place here. So if you get over this high, you'll have it on multiple time frames. That typically says you can get 2 to 3 bars on the longest time frame. Now the problem has been is that this market can't seem to finish off any of these structures to the north. And if we just go back to the last one that was pending out here, that one got redrawn all the way back to here. And if we do the math on it, I believe it reaches to about there, 2048 up to 2107. So you got about 59. And if we put 59 onto the bottom of this guy, that gets us up to what, 26? Almost there. So as you can see, is it 26 or 36? Probably 36. I probably did that math wrong. I think it's about 36. So about 12 more points. So 12 more points really isn't much. And that's after redefining this thing several times, right? I mean, remember when we first started this ABCD structure, it looked like this, and we were going up. Well, that didn't work, so then it looked like that, and then we were going up. Oh, that failed, so now it looks like this, right? Down here now ain't going up. You know, you keep redefining. This market is struggling mightily to get to the top side. Going back to that weekly, that ABCD structure there is certainly much larger if it is to fulfill. And again, this one had came back and it's struggled for what is this, 2 months now, 2.5 months to get higher. That push there is a lot higher if in fact we're going to get that kind of push out of this. I don't think we're going to get that kind of push just by the way this acts, but yeah, let's do the numbers anyway. That low 1980, so that's 19 to be 2080, about 130 points almost. or about 130, and then you add it on there, that gets you to 2160. Yeah, 2170. So it's anywhere around 2170 or so. So that would be a pretty good push still. 2170 is another 50 points. So that's the ABCD structures that exist, that are out there, you know, the S&P being the strongest one, it looks the best. If we look at the other indexes, and we'll just take them one by one, here's the NASDAQ. Again, NASDAQ hasn't gotten back to the high. NASDAQ was stronger previously. NASDAQ is still trying to reach up there. The volume's to the downside, but you know, the volume's almost always to the downside, most of the time. And so, you know, you have to realize that you have to dismiss that to some degree. As a matter of fact, last week, it actually went to the downside again, tested lower, failed to stay down there on lighter volume, does a hammer reversal, which suggests that it can probably go back up and test that high volume high, which is 51.19. NDX actually on the daily, again, looks just like the composite, but if we go to the weekly, the NDX, just like the S&P, breaks over a swing point high. Yes, it got higher twice, but couldn't hold it. It also has a high volume high. So again, it looks the way, you know, just looking at it from a perspective of the weekly charts on the domestic indexes, that the S&P wants to reach up finally and finish off that daily structure, ABCD bullish, whereas the NASDAQ and the NDX simply want to get back up there and test that high volume top. That's the way those look. And if we look at the Russell lags. You can see it lagging quite vociferously here. It's really struggling. Failed again on Friday in terms of the prior week. Looking at it on a weekly, the Russell also had outran the other indexes. That ABCD structure that was in place there still is, projects a little bit higher. That's from down here. And then if we look at it in terms of the retest regen, remember it retested here, retested again, and again is regenerating higher. And just like we saw on the NASDAQ, it tested lower here on lower volume and did a hammer reversal. That also suggests it wants to push higher. It did it this week. Looks to me like it's going to try to push a little bit higher again in the coming week. So this one doesn't have a high volume high. In fact, it has a failure up there at that high. So there's a breakdown bar essentially. So if you really got to push in the Russell, it would just simply get up to probably test that 1275 number, whereas the others would test the tops or break over them in the case of the NDX, I mean the SPX. Elsewhere, so that's the domestic indexes. If we look elsewhere, you know, what can get us higher? That's always the big question. You know, what is out there that can drive this market, you know, farther up? And the two things that have been the nemesis of late has been the dollar and has been the bonds. And so if we look at the dollar, you know, the dollar just started, I don't know if it started it, but it just finished off actually a little ABCD structure to the downside. So you get a pop up and an ABCD down. It's down here wallowing in that lows again. It's broken under here. That was a bearish retest and regenerate lower. So here's the break, there's the test, and you regenerate lower. If you take this and look at it on a weekly though, on the weekly you can see the high volume high, you come off of it with volume, you bounce back up to that breakdown area and fail. And then on that failure, you get the push down. Now that push down, as we've been talking about for quite a while, is trying to come down here to test this bar's low. If you check up the volumes on those two, volume's actually a little bit lighter. It looks to me like it's going to try to test into it this week, and I would expect the dollar might bounce out of that. If that's the case, then that is not going to be helpful to the markets. Now it's not going to be that terrible because why? Well, because it's not new highs. I mean, you're simply trading in a range now. So let's assume it gets here. Now you're trading in some sort of a range, and as long as it trades in the range, then the market's not going to get bent out of shape as a result of it. So bounce, it's not going to help the market, but it's not going to kill the market either. If we go over and look at the bonds, now the bonds have been, at least the last couple of weeks, the real story. Once the bonds began to push down, as they came off this consolidation at the highs and they pushed down, they never stopped. And the volume escalated. You saw the bonds over in Germany, do a 0.75% rise for basically zero. All of that put pressure on the European market, put pressure on these markets. But then Friday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it was trying to claw out a bottom, got a lower low on lighter volume. So that low on Wednesday was 118.64. Actually, I take that back. It didn't get the lower low. It got within about 4 cents of it. That was enough. Volume totally dried up on Thursday. And then Friday, it gaps up and just runs right back to the breakdown bar. That high is 121.65. Got over it, but settled underneath it. The real test on this is going to be the test as it comes back here on the retest regenerate. That's off this big bar. That's going to be the big test. I suspect, it can come one of two ways. I suspect it's going to actually get a little pullback into these highs again, and then to get a little ABCD up to get into that area, but I don't know that that's going to be enough to get it over it. What we do have taking place on a longer term time frame, though, is you've got volume escalating on the way down, yet when you check what it's coming into, right, it's coming into the big bar here. That's where all the volume is from October last year. Comes into it, doesn't have as much volume, right? That volume is less. Without as much volume, what does it do? Hammer reversal. This says it wants to trade higher, and if you look at it on this time frame, the retest regenerate here is off of this bar. So this could trade up to almost 127. And now if we take that number and we go back to the daily chart, 127 is going to do what? It's going to take you over this if in fact it does that. So the real test here is going to be, does the bearish retest regen hold on the daily? Why is all that important? Well, the bonds are a big driver as to what happens to the market. And if the bonds dramatically fall, that puts fear into the market, and that is what happened the last couple of weeks. If the bonds rise, that will settle some unless they start to break out again. And so again, just like the dollar, if they rise up and they don't go crazy on the upside, then you have the position where the markets actually could try to work higher. And so when I look at the dollar and I look at the bonds and I look over at the indexes, it looks to me like at least all of those, other than the Russell, all of those are fairly congruent in that they're probably saying about the same thing, and that is that this market can grind higher if it wishes to. The real problem is, does anybody want to pay up at higher price? Do you want to pay up to play? Do you want to buy a breakout in this market that has struggled all year long? That's a tough order. That's it's a hard thing to do at this particular point in time. Finally, if we go over to the world markets and we look at those and we ask, okay, what are they doing, and will they support some sort of a move like we're suggesting? Let's start in Europe. In Europe, you actually have, and some people will draw this differently, but a lot of folks will take this and say, okay, so it's consolidating down here after a move down. That simply is a continuation before it goes lower. Well, yeah, maybe, but the trend is up here, not down. And really, when you think about it, what has happened? Well, this thing had, nice big spike up. The volume highs, remember back here, I talked about that was probably the highs. And it was probably going to set up a range trade. And that was way back in April. It got up there and tested it again, didn't have the volume, and then that was the pullback, right? That was how the range got set up. Where's the range? Well, the range is basically from the tops of these bars up and from the bottoms of that area down, right? And so the range is somewhere in this area. What's it going to do? It's going to come back up here. This is the CAX now. It's going to come back up here and try to test in the higher range. It wants to try to get back up into the higher range. So the ideal is push up, and see if you can get back in the top range up here. If so, you can try to go to the top again. If not, well, you're going to come back down here and test the bottom again, and again, see if you can expand it farther down. But right now, a little bit more volume on Friday, then Thursday. Looks to me like this is going to try to push up into this area and see what it can do. Now, if we take and look at other clues, you had a bearish retest regen initially here. That retest was blown away right there, right? Got over it, stayed over it for a couple bars. That tells me it's sideways. Not only that took place, but you actually had this little swing point low in effect as well. It also was taken out. So again, that's kind of a double signal that more than likely it's not this way anymore, it's this way. That says we're range trading. And if you're range trading and you're not at a critical point, which we're not, then that says you can get there. And what is up there at that point? Well, it's the next swing point low. So I'm guessing that right in here is where it's going to have trouble. It's going to climb back up into that area, and that's probably where we're going to see it, the sellers come in again. If we look at the DAX a little bit weaker, and let's draw that one out. On the DAX, you got kind of the same scenario, and what I mean by weaker is here, your bearish retest regenerate hasn't even taken place yet. That's up here. Came into it, wasn't able to get over it. It's going to come back into it and try to do it again. Again, if you draw out your ranges, the range is somewhere probably about right there, and then whatever's behind it. And so that's going to be the area, right? That's back into this test of this bar. And if you can get over it, well, you can go back and test the highs at some point. But if you look closely here, this is where the sellers are going to make themselves known, right in that area. I expect it's going to try to get to right there, and that's probably where it's going to die. That's the DAX. Now, if we look at them on the weeklies, right, it's just a range trade. It's pulling back. It's setting up a larger range. CAX looks exactly the same. Moving over to Asia, Hong Kong. Hong Kong was setting up a range. Here's the weekly. Didn't get back as deep as we thought it might. We were looking at these two bars, didn't quite get there. So it holds up here at this higher area. Inside that is kind of two ranges, and it's right there testing into that, middle ground. Tonight, tomorrow, that'll be the test. Can you get over it? If so, you go test the tops again. If not, well, then you come down here and test these lows again, and you try to build out the range and make it broader. That's what markets do. That's price discovery. And you want to discover it with them. You want to see how they attack those areas of significance and what they do with them. Shanghai's the same, right? Shanghai made the high, came off that high, set up a range. Question will be can it come back up and test the top? Or does it fall back? Right now it's trying to test back in. Comes back down here, well, that's probably not a bad place to look at it again. One thing that I would note is Taiwan has been very surprising to the downside. Big volume spurt here. I don't really know what pushed it so much and so fast, but they took it all away and more. And so Taiwan tells me that this is not nearly as bullish as it looks. In Asia general, it's really the QE guys that are getting the benefit and nobody else. Taiwan's right back here testing back into this prior range. So this arrow was a breakout on this bar. This one was the breakout on that high. That's the retest regenerate. I would expect they'll get a bounce somewhere, but that's kind of an ugly scene to come back and take it all away like they have done. Before I hang up on everybody, let me look at Australia and see what it's doing. It's coming back in to do the bearish retest regen. And on a weekly, it got in, did a bullish retest, and is regenerating. Now it's back into the bearish. So we'll see how that plays out, which will give you a clue as to whether they're going to broaden that range or not as well. India got a little bounce again, but India still looks like it wants to come back still. Brazil still trying to push higher. I like the way Brazil's trading. My friends up in Toronto got a decent bounce. That one's just a big range trade as well. Yeah, and that one's, yeah, again, it's the same thing here. So many of these do this, right? Here was your retest, regen. You went over it, right, on this bar. You get over it, and what do? You immediately come back, and you're down here trying to break it down. So far, it's holding, but it's right at the edge, right? One more week down, and it goes sideways. But right now, it's holding. So still looking okay. And let me see, anything else? Let's look at Japan right quick, because Japan's the other money launderer. Japan still looks like it's going to try to test that bar. 19,852 is the number, and I suspect that's where we'll find the sellers. Okay, so what have we got? If we wrap it all up, we think about it from a larger perspective. You know, we have range trades. We're kind of in the lower of the two. Well, we're in the middle, in most cases, the middle of the lower range, working back to test to see if we can get in the top range again. That's overseas. Domestically, we're at the top of the range on the S&P, and we're trying to get to the top of the range on the other indexes. Put them all together, we're going to gravitate higher this week. We're going to get to those dividing points on the world markets. We're going to get to the tops on the NASDAQ, the NDX, probably sometime this week, next week. It's probably where we're going to find the sellers again. This is the way it looks. That is the weekly wrap. Thanks for joining me. Have yourself a great night. See you next time. Good night.